So today I have the pleasure of speaking with Jim Pryor, who is the CEO of the global brand agency Superunion. And today we're going to speak about creativity in a crisis. So Jim, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks, Patricia.
Brilliant. So first question for our listeners is, where are you located today and what's keeping you sane as you socially isolate?
Well, I'm in London, and lunch is what is keeping me sane, I think. Perhaps more broadly, it's having more time, which probably sounds very unscientific. I think it's having more control over the time that I use. So no commute every morning, no international travel, no time spent in unproductive meetings means more time, I think, for better quality conversations all round, including those with my family.
Brilliant. So I'd love to chat to you about your work, Jim, and what makes you so passionate about what you do.
Well, I'm the CEO of Superunion. We're a global brand agency. So we advise clients on how to build stronger brands, how to use creativity to do that. We give them strategic advice, and then we design brand identity solutions, communication solutions, physical and digital brand experiences around the world. What I'm really passionate about is brilliant new ideas, new thinking, challenging the orthodoxies that hold back progress in some cases.
Okay, and I suppose COVID-19 has changed everything. So what has it changed for your own work?
Well, I think you could dispute actually whether or not it's changed everything. I think it's certainly changed a lot of things. I think there's also something of a debate perhaps about the extent to which the changes we are seeing are permanent versus temporary. I think some of them will be more permanent, although I wonder, once the virus has passed and the wheels of capitalism start rolling with full force again, quite how much of what we see right now will remain in place, but that's perhaps another conversation. But certainly a huge amount has changed at the moment. I think more than anything around working practices, the speed of adoption of technologies, for example, that we've been all talking about for a decade or so, suddenly accelerated over the last 2 months, and conversations like this, for example, happening now through new forms in a very positive way. Mine is a business that relies very much on collaboration, shared ideas, iterative working practices. And if you'd said to me 3 months ago, could that work in a 100% remote environment, I would have probably given you an emphatic no as an answer to that. But actually it's remarkable how quickly we and others have adapted into that. And if anything, finding more efficiency, and more creativity in all of that. So, really productive, interesting time. I think it goes back to the point I was making earlier on. When you can self-determine how you use your time, it actually allows you to find a lot of new solutions that you're perhaps sort of a little held back by protocols from doing in the past.
Yeah, so one thing I picked up there when you were speaking is this whole idea of your team. So I suppose in UCD, and especially in the UCD Institute for Discovery, we're I suppose advocating for interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary teams. So would that be true as well in your business?
Absolutely. I mean, interdisciplinarity is a word I would use more often if only I could say it better, right? I mean, it's fundamental to what we do. I mean, creativity is all about the fusion of different concepts and ideas together. It's all about the kind of intellectual capital that gets gained really through the addition of new ideas, new thoughts. It only works when you have multiple points of reference, when you have open-mindedness to new ways of approaching. And I think it's very interesting in what we do. I mean, you can look at the sort of, interdisciplinarity in itself, not necessarily new, but it's been very much based in a kind of knowledge economy for the last 30 years, which was really about knowledge transference from one area to another area. I've learned this here, I'm going to apply this here. I think what we're doing, and what I think is more interesting in the creative world and where the world is going, is less about just pure knowledge transfer, more about the kind of capital of ideas. So it's an ideas economy, more about kind of white spaces, concepts, notions, quite scientific actually in some ways. And certainly from a process point of view. And I think that's where the really interesting ideas of the world, you look at the world's most valuable companies these days, that's how they've been born, that's how they've grown. So yes, interdisciplinarity is absolutely critical to what we do.
So you're talking about creative ideas, and I'm just wondering, could you give us some examples of what type of creative ideas have you seen coming out of this current crisis, the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, you see some sectors at the moment that are absolutely booming. I mean, if you're in, a technology company or a telecommunications company right now, they are now the sort of roads and railways of our world. They're how we get to work. They're how we get our kids to school. They're how we connect ourselves to our family and to friends and our sources of entertainment and so forth. So there's a lot of activity happening in sectors like that. There's a lot of activity happening in areas like esports, which is really, literally the only game in town right now. So a lot of things going on there. But I think what I'm seeing overall, that creativity in the world at the moment is less about big set piece plays, so less about making great films or great advertising or great events, and much more about a sort of pragmatic, hands-on attitude to how companies respond. And the businesses that I'm admiring at the moment, and the things I'm really enjoying at the moment, are those businesses, for example, turning over design and manufacturing capabilities to make ventilators or PPE, for example. If you want the coolest face mask in the world right now, check out 31 Chapel Lane, who are a business in Limerick, who switched over their garment design and manufacture capabilities to making face masks. And it's things like that that are really wonderful examples of practical, pragmatic, useful, meaningful creativity that resonate the most, I think, at this point in time.
Fantastic. So that's great. So we're going to move on to some questions. And just before I do, don't forget, audience, that you can submit your questions via the chat function. I have some questions already coming in for you, Jim. So do you think scientists are creative?
Well, you know what? I think there's a huge amount of similarity in process in some ways from the science world into the creative world. I mean, I actually did an undergraduate degree in physics, and the one thing I learned from that is that I was never going to be a physicist. But I think the sort of scientists and creative people are problem solvers. That's fundamentally what we do. It's for me, it's the economists and the engineers I worry about more. And like we're more distant from them in some ways because they're much more process and linear in their thinking. But I think that ability to interrogate a problem, to hypothesize, to speculate, to iterate on solutions, it's hugely creative, right? It's hugely creative. And there's also, I think, a lot of great creativity, like I imagine is the case with a lot of great science, starts with an experiment, comes up with a result that appears positive, and then you spend your time working out why it's right. And that's very often how a great creative process works as well. Try something. If it feels like it's working, spend a bit of time just checking that it is, and then then you've got a result. So yes, scientists and creative people, I think, go hand in hand very nicely.
Okay, so more questions coming in. Will advertising thrive or suffer during coronavirus, during COVID-19?
Well, as an industry, it's going to suffer to the extent that it's not going to have the same level of revenues attached to it as it did previously. I mean, that's just a point of fact. I think it's also important that we look at what role advertising plays. I mean, advertising in itself is a broad set of concepts and ideas, of course. I think there's an important role for advertising to play, not just in the terms of public awareness, but also, a big part of what we do as an organization, it's not just about trying to project out what an organization is to the world. I mean, that's a part of what we do. It's important that people understand what choices they have. But we also spend a lot of time trying to sort of influence the way that organizations behave so that they respond better to what the world needs. So perhaps at the moment, our role in the agency world is yes, do a good job of continuing to project out good messages, but also, spend our time focusing and looking at what we can do to help organizations respond in the right way. And one would hope, and I am very, very nervous about being too predictive at this point in time, we're in early days in this crisis, and I don't think we know what the world is going to be in 9 months or even 6 months or 3 months. But I would hope that perhaps one of the things will come out of this will be a stronger sense of what the sort of purpose and nature of good organizations are. And I'd hope we can play a role in influencing that.
Yeah, so I think along that lines, there's another question so I'm going to ask it now that kind of ties in with that. It's almost imagining a post-COVID world. Which sector do you think will be most well placed to continue propagating positive change amongst consumers?
Sorry, what?
Sorry, so which sector do you think will be the most well placed to continue propagating positive change amongst consumers?
Well, that's a very broad question, right? I mean, there are several strands, I think, to that are important. As I say, I don't think we're not even at the end of the beginning of the of this crisis. So I think getting too much into where are we going to be at the end of this is a little dangerous. You know, I'm fascinated at the moment. We're a global company, so I'm talking to people in our network in all different sectors, all different countries on, you know, pretty much a daily basis, and every single conversation is a little bit different. And I think one of the things that makes prediction really hard right now is that the telecommunications industry is not the same as the hospitality industry. China is in a very different place already than we are in Europe, for example. The situation on Thursday last week anywhere in the world was very different to the situation as it is in Monday in the world. So prediction is difficult. And I'm much more in favor of focusing on the here and now than looking ahead. However, you know, I think a couple of interesting things are going to come out of this. One is, I think businesses are going to get much more focused on what is the real value that I put into the world, as opposed to what is the kind of theoretical value I would like to put in the world. There's been an awful lot of time in companies spent talking about, you know, what kind of organization would I like to be? And I think we will and we need to see more companies saying, what kind of organization am I right now? And I think that's important. I also think we're going to see a massive wave of new entrepreneurialism come up as a consequence of this. Much is being made of the number of small businesses that have been forced to close right now, which is of course a tragedy. But all of those businesses, or at least many of those businesses and many of those entrepreneurs, are going to come out of this crisis. They're going to have good access to funding. They're going to have learned from their previous experiences, and they're going to be saying, hey, I've got an idea about something I could do now in this world, which is going to be more valuable than that which I was doing before. So I'm actually quite excited about the wave of entrepreneurialism that I think we'll see. And I think the more it's linked to a kind of purposeful, meaningful way forward, that will be good. And by the way, the whole landscape's going to change, because nobody's going to go back to going to the office 5 days a week, you know, 100% of the time. I mean, there will be, well, some people, but no company is going to adopt that. So I think a huge amount of change ahead. I don't want to call it specifically right now, but I'd be optimistic about the fact that there will be a way out of this, that you know, rather like, you know, in the aftermath of a forest fire, the vegetation regrows, and so it will be, I think, from a sort of business and social standpoint in this world.
Yeah, so actually a question came in kind of aligned to what you've just said, and it's about these, you know, creative startups that you're speaking about. How will they, so the question is, how will these secure investment?
Well, look, the governments are going to have to stimulate growth in the economy. So I think, you know, there's going to be, I don't think sources of funding for businesses are going to be more limited in the future. And of course, there's going to be a whole bunch of private backers who are going to be keen to get behind companies as well. I mean, we're going to have to see a major economic boost. All of this borrowing that's going on at a governmental level around the world, you know, it's going to have to be funded by somewhere, and it can't just solely be funded by increasing taxation on those people that are still working, right? We need the economy to get back into fast growth. I mean, we've lived through a decade of fairly stagnant economic growth, really. Everybody talked after the financial crisis in 08, 09 about the need for change. There's been much talk about technology disruption. You know, as we've said, didn't really happen. I think we could be poised to see a lot more of that. I don't think funding is going to be the problem, and I don't think ideas are going to be the problem as we come out of this. The question at the moment is the timing, and at what point one can push the go button again. But you know, I'd be confident that it will come.
So in the last, I suppose, 45 seconds, there's a lot of questions, but I'm kind of going to try and summarize them here. And it's really, how can we be more creative? So these ideas you're speaking about, creativity, how can we, or individually or organizationally, be more creative?
Yeah, that's tough in the 30 seconds.
Sorry,
right? Write yourself, write yourself a really good, clear brief. I'd say the one thing that I would, you know, if I was saying what can scientists learn about being more creative, because you're already very creative, is learn to focus your brief, learn to articulate the proposition that around what it is that you're creating in the simplest way. If you can explain it to somebody over the telephone in a 15 seconds that remain, then it's a good idea. If you can't, go back, simplify, and then yeah, you'll get there.
So a 15-second elevator pitch as opposed to 60. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, cutting
Jim,
my clock accordingly.
yeah. Jim, an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for attending. And if you'd like to sign up for our series, you can do so at ucd.ie/discovery or zoomforthought.ie. Thank you so much, Jim. An absolute pleasure. Thanks, everybody.
My pleasure.
Bye. Bye.